In this video, I've gathered all the info and theories about Huggy in Chapter 4 and 5. Today, we're gonna break down Huggy's return, how it'll impact the Chapter 5 gameplay, who saved Huggy, and whose side he'll be on. We'll cover all that and more. Don't be shy. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to support the channel, just let this video play in the background while you're doing chores or getting ready for bed. We all remember how our encounter with Huggy Wuggy ended at the end of Chapter 1. Let's just say he didn't pick the best moment to attack us, and like a sack of potatoes, he tumbled down, crashing into every possible pipe along the way. Even back then, it seemed like the fall wasn't that high, and the injuries weren't that severe to completely take down a monster like him. But the moment we finally reached the end of Chapter 4, something happened that fans had been waiting for over 3 years.
Security is very important to us here. If I were you, I'd start running.
By the way, there's a theory that Leith Pierre is actually Huggy Wuggy, but that's a topic for another day. And now, after 3.5 years, we finally see Huggy again. And what do we get? A mutilated body, half an arm missing, and some nightmare fuel on his head. Doesn't that seem a bit weird? I mean, these injuries don't match up at all with what should have happened after his fall in Chapter 1. And that's where things start getting really interesting, right? After the final scenes of Chapter 2 and 3, most fans were convinced that the prototype had taken Huggy for further experiments. And honestly, that made perfect sense. But what actually happened will seriously surprise you. The first thought that popped into players' heads after seeing Huggy again was, who the hell did this to him? And who the hell saved him? We'll talk about the first part later, but as for the second, there were tons of theories. Some believe Poppy saved him. There's even a theory that Huggy is a good guy now and he's back to help us. Some think Poppy or even Kissy Missy talked to him and convinced him to return. In fact, a lot of people are convinced that Kissy was the one who got through to Huggy, and that at the beginning of Chapter 5, we'll see Kissy standing right behind our good old Huggy. But here's a little challenge for you. What small detail in this scene completely destroys that theory?
An obvious question with an obvious answer.
What did you do with Ollie?
I'm right here, Poppy. For you. I'll always be here.
The doctor, Catnap, Mommy and Huggy, they're all dead. You have nothing now. No one. And soon, you'll have less than that. All those years. Was there ever an Ollie?
Yes, there was. But that was a very long time ago. Let me tell you what comes next. I'm going to come up there. And I'm going to find you. Your collaborators. The few you have left, they will be dealt with.
Yeah, you heard that right. If you caught the sound of footsteps and noticed Poppy and Kissy's reactions, you're on the right track. And let's not forget that Poppy straight up says that Huggy is dead, which means there's no way she had anything to do with his return. And honestly, if Kissy knew the truth about Huggy, Poppy would have known too. That's why it's pretty clear that these two had nothing to do with his legendary comeback. Oh, and remember that huge mystery from Chapter 3? The attack on Kissy? After this scene, a lot of people started thinking, wait, what if it was Huggy? But considering everything we just talked about, I think it's pretty obvious that the real culprit was the prototype. Now, you might argue, what if those footsteps belong to the prototype? Which, fair point. But there are a few things that just don't add up. We know that the prototype is massive, but that monster was moving pretty fast. A lot like Huggy when he made his big return. And let's be real, the prototype isn't exactly built for speed. On top of that, the prototype plays more of a big brother role. He's not the type to get his hands dirty. Instead, he prefers to send his pawns to to do the work for him. And of course, during the conversation with the prototype, we don't hear any of those distortions that were clearly echoing around our location. I think you get what I mean. There were also theories that Huggy was saved by Dr. Harley Sawyer, but considering his, let's say, condition, that's absolutely impossible. So in the end, we're left with two options. Either the prototype saved Huggy, or it was some unknown character. But since everything is pointing to Chapter 5 being the finale, it's unlikely they'd introduce some big new character this late in the game. Which means the only logical answer is that the prototype saved Huggy. But why? Let's break it down. Many noticed that the distance between the place where we dropped Huggy and the underground lab is insanely huge. And there's no way Huggy, especially in that condition, could have made it there on his own. This once again points to the idea that whoever saved Huggy had a well-developed mind. Because let's be real, someone like Yarnaby wouldn't have figured out how to transport him. Just a little fun fact, most likely, there was someone else in that first location besides Huggy. And after this secret creature tried to finish off the dying Huggy, someone might have stepped in to help. It was probably one of the prototype's close allies. And considering Dr. Sawyer's abilities and his connection to the prototype, he definitely knew Huggy was in trouble. So someone could have come to his aid and then taken him to the prototype. Or maybe it was the prototype himself. That part is still unknown. Then things got even more interesting. Prototype healed Huggy's wounds and gave him time to rest and regain strength. While some people are theorizing that Huggy might now be on our side, I'm still almost completely sure that's not the case. By the way, Huggy's return only makes me think more that Chapter 5 is going to be the grand finale of the Poppy Playtime saga. And it also hints that we might meet other previous antagonists in Chapter 5, which I'll definitely get into later. After we saw Huggy's fall in Chapter 1, there were tons of questions about whether he actually died. Some people were 100% sure he was gone for good, while others analyzed the height of the fall and the injuries he took, realizing it wasn't enough to kill a monster like Huggy. That's when the theory popped up that he survived and would return eventually. Huggy didn't show any signs of life until the end of Chapter 4, where he made that insane comeback. And of course, theories immediately started flying about why Mob Entertainment made that move. A big chunk of the audience was convinced it was just a cheap stunt to bring back hype and regain the game's popularity. But come on! Just look at the peak player count when Chapter 4 dropped. It was almost as high as the last two chapters combined. It took me literally a few seconds to realize that Huggy's return wasn't just some desperate cash grab on top of a buggy, unfinished game. Then, user FAR44NC00. Seriously, why not Alex or something simple like that? Straight up asked one of the former devs, did you guys always plan to bring Huggy back? Like, I know he's a bit lackluster because of being the first boss and all, but I've seen some people saying it was a desperate attempt to bring back the hype. So, was it always planned? In response, Isaac said, it was always planned, but I regret not building up to it more. We were afraid of tipping our hand and making it too obvious, since everybody theorized he'd return even with basically no foreshadowing. Also, one of the users wanted to know if the original idea behind Poppy Playtime was still being followed, and Isaac gave a pretty clear and direct answer. 90% of the really big lore beats existed in Chapter 1. Hour of Joy did too, but it was called The Rapture. Prototype has always existed. Most chapter antagonists weren't created until their respective chapter. Overall, the story has simply become far more dense, not different. And these are the key answers from Isaac in the context of our video, cause now we're 100% sure that even after Isaac left, the main storyline is still gonna follow the original script. And the fact that Huggy's fall and return were planned even before Chapter 1 dropped makes you wonder, why did the devs always intend to bring him back? And what role is he gonna play in the new chapter? Right now, we've got a ton of questions. How did Huggy survive and make it back to us? Why don't his wounds match what we saw when he fell off the bridge in Chapter 1? How is his return connected to Harley Sawyer's death, if it even is? Wait, what? Dr. Sawyer? You're probably asking, what does he have to do with this? Give me a sec. I'll explain everything soon. And what about Poppy and Kissy? Is that damn prototype somehow involved in Huggy's comeback? And finally, why did the devs actually bring him back? All these questions and more will be answered by the end of this video. I think it's only right to start with the main question of this video. And if we already know that Huggy's return was planned from the start, the reasons behind it are still unknown. Everyone who watches my videos knows I keep pushing the idea that Chapter 5 is going to be the final game. And if I turn out to be right, then Huggy's return isn't just necessary for the story, it's also kind of symbolic. This whole thing started with that blue monster, and he's the one who made Poppy Playtime blow up in the first place. So ending this long journey with him just feels right, and honestly, pretty damn poetic. Something tells me the devs always plan to wrap up the story with the face of their game, and if we look at it from that angle, Huggy's return makes total sense. But we're not here for some surface level discussion. We're gonna dig deep and uncover the whole truth behind why they brought him back. Now, a lot of people probably noticed that Huggy's got way worse injuries than you'd expect from just a fall. That means someone must have attacked him on his way back to us and someone else must have saved him. By the way, I've got a whole video on my channel about who could have saved Huggy, so if you want to dive into that theory, especially since I'm going to name the suspect in this video, check it out after this one. That would really help the channel grow and I'd appreciate it a ton. During the scene where Poppy and the prototype are talking, I caught a few really important details, ones that might actually reveal the devs' true motives for bringing Huggy back.
I'm right here, Poppy.
For you,
I'll always be
here.
The doctor, Catnap, Mommy and Huggy, they're all dead. You have nothing now. No one. And soon, you'll have less than that.
Stop that.
You don't need to pretend
Anymore. Poppy. You don't need to play at being stronger than you are. You can come home.
How much do you know?
Everything.
Yes, there was.
But that was a very long time ago. Let me tell you what comes next.
I'm going to
Come up there.
and I'm going to
Find you. Your collaborators. The few you have left, they will be dealt with.
What are you going to do with me?
I've got something special in mind.
I've already explained why the sounds we heard belong to Huggy, and it turns out he's been nearby this whole time. Let me just say it straight up. Huggy was saved by the prototype, but even with that, I'm still pretty sure Huggy isn't gonna obey the prototype. This might seem weird, especially since we know Huggy was once just a pawn in the prototype's game. But what changed? And no, I'm not gonna say Huggy's on our side now, or that he came back because of Kissy. We know they're good friends. But now Huggy's gonna help us take down the prototype? That's not what's happening at all. I bet now you're even more confused. But don't worry, this is where it gets really interesting, and you're about to learn a lot more about Huggy and his return. Let's start by busting some myths. I've seen theories floating around that Dr. Sawyer brought Huggy back during experiments with resurrecting the dead thanks to the mysterious properties of the poppy flower. And while this theory isn't completely out there and actually has some solid reasoning, the poppy flower is meant for bringing the dead back to life, not healing wounds. And we're definitely sure Huggy just got injured, but he didn't die after that fall. The connection between Huggy and Dr. Sawyer in the context of this video is pretty simple. They're both going to be key antagonists in their respective chapters. Well, even though Huggy might have seemed a bit dumb at first, he's actually a pretty smart and strong monster. And of course, the prototype wouldn't want to lose such a valuable asset. That's why he saved one of his own minions. But things didn't go exactly as the prototype planned. Anyone remember Mommy Longlegs? This lady made a huge splash in 2022 and got a ton of Poppy Playtime fans falling for her. but her death raises a ton of questions when we talk about the context of our video.
What have you done? You make me part of you! You can't do this to me!
So this is how we found out that the prototype takes the bodies of dead monsters and makes them a part of himself. And if Catnap blindly believed in the prototype and saw it as an honor, Huggy, just like Mommy, isn't on board with becoming a part of the prototype. After being saved, he just pretended to be loyal to him, which is why he planted the explosives near the vent where we were hiding. And you want to tell me that after Huggy tried to kill us, he'll actually be on our side? Sure, you could theorize that he set the explosion in a way to avoid hurting us, just to show some loyalty to the prototype. But to me, that sounds a little nuts, and I doubt the developers planned it that way. What's actually interesting, though, is that I'm convinced Huggy's gonna be against everyone. His main goal in the Playtime factory is to survive, and if we and the prototype destroy each other, that'd be the perfect outcome for him. Or at least, if the prototype dies, Huggy will probably get a peaceful life. Based on all this, I can confidently say that Huggy will return in Chapter 5 as a third force. Huggy's gonna play a key role in Chapter 5, no matter the ending of the game. At one point, he might help us get to the prototype, and just 10 minutes later, he could make our lives a hell of a lot harder. Before we wrap things up, let me throw out another theory. Fans are actively discussing the possibility that Huggy could actually be Leith Pierre, and we know for sure that those same labs will be the main location in Chapter 5.
Hi, my name is Leith Pierre, and I'm the head of innovation here at Playtime Co. If you're seeing this, you must be very, very lost. Well, rest assured, friend, our state-of-the-art laboratory is just up ahead. Why don't you just go on inside and tap one of our scientists on the shoulder? Tell them you're lost. They'll be glad to help. All right. Let's be honest. You're not supposed to be here. This is the single most high security, high clearance section of the whole factory. When someone finds you down here, you will be shot. And before you get any ideas, don't think you can just sneak away either. No, the second you put this tape in, it set off an alarm. So if anyone's home, they know exactly where you are. Pretty nifty, huh? Security is very important to us here. If I were you, I'd start running.
On one hand, this theory has some merit, but honestly, I don't believe it much. However, this tape reveals something else. We realize that the labs are the most secure area of Playtime Co. And if we just walk in there without any backup, the prototype could kill us as easily as it did with Catnap. And since Poppy escaped, Kissy's injured, and Ollie turned out to be the prototype, it feels like the only option to guide us safely and not get killed within seconds is Huggy. He was once the prototype's pawn, so he's definitely been in those labs. And who better than him to know the ins and outs of those places? What do you think of this theory? Drop your thoughts in the comments.